I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Hey, welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson. I'm a naturopathic doctor and I am a NAMS, or the North American Menopause Society, certified menopause practitioner, which is really important when it comes to our topic today. We're specifically talking about aging and brain health. I had a lot of title ideas for this particular podcast episode, and how we try and sort of sexy up brain health and make this something that people want to actually listen to. And so if you've opened and downloaded and listened thus far, please stick with me. I think one of the things I struggle with the most, I think, when talking about menopause care is that there is the sexy aspect of menopause care, and then there is the less sexy but probably far more important aspect of menopause care. The sexy things that we'll see, discussed online are things that maybe superficially women care about, whether that's signs of aging, like physical signs of aging, body composition, hot flashes, right? Insomnia. These are things that bring people in to talk about menopause. These are things that you will feel sold items about menopause online. Nobody is offering a brain solution for menopause women online, or talking about the aspects of brain health that are really, truly important. I sometimes will get sucked into the conversation about menopause brain, which I'll explain the difference between the two in a second. But we're not really talking about overall brain health, cognitive health in women. The forgetfulness and some of those pieces that you feel day to day through that sort of more rocky storm of the menopause transition actually mostly go away with time, which is a relief. But that means that the focus of the conversation on brain health probably needs to go beyond that, right? We joke about the sticky notes and about forgetting, where your glasses are when you're wearing them and whatnot. But as your brain adapts to changes in hormones over 40, some of those pieces actually go away with time. And what doesn't go away with time is our sort of long-term risk of cognitive decline with respect to brain health, with women being at an increased risk for almost all cognitive related changes with age and Alzheimer's. And so that probably is the more important of the two conversations. But we're going to dive into that today. I think I have a good relationship with my brain. There's been moments where I maybe haven't, and I would say that probably stems from years of bullying through elementary school. I was put in a sort of advanced or gifted program in elementary school. And whenever I think of the word brain, I feel like I'm hearing the chanting on the school bus of the word brainer. And it's funny because at that time, from grade 5 to 8, when I, was flagged in this isolated classroom, but it was within a larger school. And I'm going to say, unfortunately, because these poor 16 kids that were in my class were very ostracized by the rest of the school. And I remember the kids, yelling at us that we were, brainers or geeks or whatever. And I would spend sort of hours waiting for the bus every morning, talking to this crabapple tree about, all of these comebacks in my head that I, of course, never, ever, ever said, but around how I was going to be so happy that I had my brain when I got older, right? And this was me in grade 6, really trying to give it to this crabapple tree. One day you'll be sorry, I have this great brain. That every time I go and talk about brain health, for some reason, I reflect back on that period of my life. And I think it's kind of, sort of a good segue into this conversation about age-related brain changes, because it's something that there's going to be aspects of our life, weirdly, where your brain is like a negative thing. You may have a not a great relationship with your brain because of your mental health, right? There's certainly been moments where I felt like my brain was sick, or I felt like my brain was struggling with PMDD and anxiety, and maybe I felt a little disconnected from her up there because we were struggling at various times. But it's almost one of those organs, almost like all of our organs, that you can kind of ignore until it becomes a problem. And often by the time it becomes a problem, it's a little bit too late. Right? So this preventative conversation around cognitive change, brains, and aging really should start at a much younger age than when we're trying to find our keys, or we're realizing that we're struggling to incorporate new things into our brain, or that we're really actually starting to see some of those age-related cognitive decline. And if you have aging parents, this is kind of a good way to sort of look ahead and say, what is that like up there in the 70s and 80s? And how do I want to be in those decades? The changes we want to make to brain health probably need to start now. And I'm going to say 30s, 40s, 50s. I don't know if we have enough research at this point to say that our nutrition, etc., in our younger years has a dramatic change on cognitive trajectory over our entire lifetime, even though we do see that, when kids eat berries and when some of those pieces happen at a much younger age, we do see improvement in cognitive function. And most of those recommendations actually span across all the decades. So the things that I'm talking about right now, if you're not in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, these probably still apply. And we do have some evidence that by changing nutrition as we age can improve cognitive change, even if things have already started to, change for the worse, meaning that if your cognitive decline has started to decrease, we actually may be able to slow down some of those changes through nutrition, which is really cool. So in that menopause transition, and I'm going to say over 40. Okay. So as we start to experience big fluctuations in hormone levels, we do start to see pressure being put on the areas of the brain that are particularly sensitive to hormone fluctuations. And in perimenopause, that may be experienced more as changes to your mood, like depression, changes to sleep, such as insomnia, and we may see struggles or changes with the ability to maintain your body temperature, which shows up as either hot flashes or night sweats. And really all of those changes are brain-related changes, right? We maybe don't always think about them that way, but all of those areas of the brain that control sleep and mood regulation and temperature regulation are brain-based symptoms. So you can see that your brain is particularly sensitive to hormone fluctuation. And if you've been a person who has struggled with postpartum depression or PMS or PMDD, you probably already know that your brain is sensitive to hormone fluctuations. But over 40 is where we start to see these sort of rapid changes as people start to have less and less ovulatory cycles. Now, if you're 40 and your cycles are bang on perfect, you might not have noticed these changes yet, but the conversation still is worthy of having at that age, because the more in advance that we can start to place some of the emphasis on nutrition for cognitive health, the better. So when that full transition of menopause happens, and especially over those last couple years before your last period, the lows of estrogen, and we believe that estrogen is the big culprit here. We don't quite understand what role progesterone plays in the brain. There's definitely progesterone or progesterone metabolite receptors in the brain, and which is partly why we use HRT for sleep, or how progesterone can be applied for sleep. But we don't quite understand the impact of progesterone on cognitive health quite yet. But estrogen really is she's the queen when it comes to cognitive health. And when we do tests on learning and memory and word recall, we do see some changes, like unstandardized tests, and specifically in that perimenopause, menopause transition, we seem to have difficulty with like learning how to do some of those cognitive tests. So there's a million different cognitive tests, and they're testing all sorts of different things. Word recall, like look at this picture and then like pick the picture out again and say these words back to me. There's a lot of cognitive tests that are testing various domains, whether it's like spatial recognition or short-term memory, that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert at those things. I'm definitely not. But when we look at the research on cognitive health, they're usually using these like validated measures of testing cognitive health. And I mean, women don't fail by any means in this stage of life. There are a couple of areas that seem to shift and change, but the like objective testing that we do for women in menopause are actually less clear than the subjective experience of the women. So for example, if we put them in a lab and we test them or test you, you're going to struggle more during this period of life on a few different domains of cognitive function. And it's like learning. Like, so there are some tests where you have to like do it and then they repeat it on you later. And then, and you technically should get better, right? Like if you literally do a cognitive test and then do it again a week later, it should be better because you've already done it before. And so you should be faster. In perimenopause and menopause, or in the early stage of menopause, we actually find that the women are not any faster the second time. So it's like we didn't actually learn it. We were just like, oh, here's another cognitive test, even though we've done it like a week ago. And I do think that translates, right? When we think clinically around what how women feel during this time, it's like that incorporation of new stuff is tough. Right. And so I think we even subjectively maybe can identify with that, but we don't like get a glowing F across all domains of cognitive function when we put women in a lab setting and test them, which is kind of interesting. But if we ask women, if we say like, hey, what's been your experience of your cognitive function? Women report that it's worse, and the numbers are high. It's like 60% in some studies, 40% in other studies, women report subjectively that things have changed for them, word recall, etc. You walk into a room and you don't remember why you went in there. This all increases subjectively, and subjective experience is still incredibly important. It's just fascinating that when we put people through the actual tests to try and test those areas of the brain, we don't fail. So anyways, it's interesting. So I want to touch on two things before we move into talking about nutrition and brain health. One of them is that I want you to remember that during this time, while cognitive changes are happening, it's also a lot of pressure being put on other body systems that absolutely impact cognition. So if people don't sleep, their cognitive function is poorer. If people are struggling with their mental health or depression, their, subjective experience of their cognitive health will also be poorer. So although your menopause symptoms don't 100% explain what's happening in your brain, right? So it's not like you are struggling with your cognitive health solely because you can't sleep. We do have to consider that entire big picture when we're looking at things. And so your brain is not isolated from the rest of your body's experience of menopause. And so if you are drinking more because you're struggling with your mood or sleep or what have you, like that will impact your cognitive health. So it's a bigger conversation, obviously. The second thing I want to focus on is that, or just this small little like glimmer of hope, is that most of the cognitive changes that happen in menopause do go away. And so you don't need to feel like your brain is shriveling up in menopause and that you are no longer going to be capable. If you are having difficulty with word recall and you're like, oh shit, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm not going to be able to run this company. Here I am in menopause. This is it. It's not true. So the vast majority of the cognitive changes that occur in that transition window actually do get better. And so I want you to have that hope. Now, This also presents a very special opportunity for us to also screen you for early cognitive changes that are a consequence of partly aging and cardiovascular health, not just hormonal health. So if you're older than 55, right, like if you've moved through menopause quite some time ago and you are still struggling with cognitive health, or you are suddenly struggling with your cognitive health, this might actually be a different conversation. And so for practitioners, this is a really important opportunity for us to not only educate about brain health, but also screen to see if patients are at any unique risks for cognitive health with respect to, dementia or mild cognitive impairment. There are some genetic tendencies towards having poorer cognitive function or being at an increased risk of changes to cognitive function as we age. There are some, like even you can test for your ApoE genetics, which is a particular gene that's been connected to an increased likelihood of suffering from dementia. I actually have that gene variant. I've done I did 23andMe, but one of those like point of care or point of purchase genetic tests. And I actually have that variant, which means that over my lifetime, I have an increased risk of Alzheimer's or dementia. So there are some ways that we can sort of test you on like a more global scale if you're going to be at an increased risk. But that's kind of what I wanted to say there, is that, it might be menopause related. It also might not be. And there are other reasons why we have cognitive change. And if you're well past menopause and have cognitive change, this is something that really should be addressed with your practitioner. Okay, so let's talk about the nutrition piece. There's really one particular nutrition pattern that I wanted to focus on the conversation today. And nutrition and brain health is hard to study, and both of them actually independently are a bit hard to study. And then of course, when we smush them together, they are also hard to study. Commonly when we talk about nutrition, like in a colloquial way, I literally never say that word correctly the first go around. My brain was like panicking. Like, you're going to use that word, Jordan? Come on. Anyways, when we talk about this in a colloquial way, we're often talking about like the impact that nutrition has on your brain day to day, right? So eat a high protein breakfast. Breakfast is the most important part of the day. Feed your kids a great breakfast so that they perform well at school. When I went keto, my brain felt amazing for that first hour until I realized I don't eat carbs anymore. We hear this conversation about food and brain health in a very short-term window, right? Caffeine, very short-term impacts on brain health. If you feel particularly slow or sluggish after a big holiday dinner, again, brain function, nutrition, we're talking about hours of time. We're very rarely talking about the projection of your nutrition over a span of 10, 15, 20, 50 years. And really, when we're looking at cognitive health, that is probably where we need to place the emphasis. So we're actually going to talk about sort of two different aspects of nutrition here. We're going to talk a little bit about that short-term piece, like are there any tips or things you can do to improve like meno brain? But more importantly, I want to talk about that big long-term situation when it comes to brain health and cognitive health, because there's really one dietary pattern right now that stands out as being perhaps the most important to adopt to help support long-term cognitive health. Most of the research that's done on nutrition and brain health is done on older adults. So the vast majority is around 65 years of age and up. So really not capturing our menopause population or a younger population, with the exception of a few studies, which we'll kind of highlight today. But that day-to-day struggle with nutrition, and when I teach clinicians about how to support their patients' brain health in menopause, I say we have to kind of talk about this in two steps. One, there's like the long term, but the short term is not that different than talking to any other patient about their nutrition who's struggling with focus, concentration, fatigue during the day. Right? You got to ask yourself these kinds of questions about, like, is there something about the way that you space your food out through the day? Are you dieting, right? Like, are your calories and are your macronutrients actually good enough to support your focus, concentration, and cognitive function during the day, right? Are there aspects of your week or of your month or of the season you're in that are influencing your nutrition that are then influencing your ability to focus or concentrate during the day? It's not uncommon for women to be dieting during this phase of life. It's not uncommon for people to be quite busy, which puts a lot of pressure on their nutrition patterns. And so in this phase of life, I don't think we treat the day-to-day experience of your brain health and nutrition that much differently than anybody else, right? If we had like a young person, like a youth who was going to school and was falling asleep at their desk, right? Like immediately, what would you start to think about? Did you have a good breakfast? Did you eat your lunch, right? Are you overbooked? Did you have hockey too late? And yet we rarely are able to ask ourselves those same reflective questions when it comes to our own nutrition and our day-to-day impact, right? So we'll have women who get up, have a cup of coffee, don't really have anything for breakfast because they feel guilty about whatever they ate last night. They work through lunch, they're overbooked, they hit a spin class, right? They stay up too late watching Netflix, and then they go to bed, and then they do the same thing the following day, and they're tired and can't concentrate. Right? So you almost have to like parent yourself a little bit when it comes to your nutrition on a day-to-day perspective. Like, are you literally fueling yourself to run your day? And is your cognitive function being influenced by your day-to-day nutrition choices? You may have seen some positive literature about, or positive conversations online about dieting and calorie restriction on brain health, right? Like, mildly cut calories and your brain will thrive. That's only true if you also are not nutritionally deficient while you do that. So when we study dieting in a lab, right, we feed the people well, right? They're dieting, but they're well fed. They have all their nutritional needs met. When women in the wild diet, they cut out food groups, they cut out macronutrient groups, they cut out lots of things that are actually supportive to health. And so you can't get down to 1,200 or 1,500 calories without sacrificing or compromising something about your nutritional quality, unless you've had like a significant amount of support to be able to do that. So there's lots of reasons why your day-to-day nutrition might be influencing your cognitive health. Okay, so I want you to look at that and sort of have some of those reflection questions. And if you can't figure that out, that's where a professional can be quite helpful in pointing those pieces out around protein intake, etc. When we start to talk about the foods, though, that are actually beneficial for cognitive health and this particular diet, it's actually called the MIND diet. And it is a marriage between a couple of other diets that we have actually seen positive outcomes for other aspects of health. So the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, both of them have been used for cardiovascular health. They both have very healthy principles associated with them. Specifically, the kinds of oils are used and the reduction in sodium intake, the focus on fruits and vegetables and whole grains and fiber, etc. So the MIND diet, which actually stands for Mediterranean DASH Diet Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, which is just so convenient that became the acronym. I wonder how those people felt around that table when they realized that the diets they were studying actually spelt out the word mind. Anyways, the MIND diet is a play on these particular nutrition patterns that continues to focus on leafy greens and vegetables, nuts, legumes, berries, lean protein. And it emphasizes a few servings that a bit more than those other two diets. So whereas the MED diet and the DASH diet sort of make some sweeping recommendations with respect to vegetables and whatnot, the MIND diet insists that you have berries, insists that you have fish. It insists that you have olive oil, which the MED diet really kind of does that as well. And it insists that green vegetables are kind of the focus. The MIND diet also insists that we decrease a few things. So decreasing red meat, decreasing cheese and fried food. I hate how they've lumped cheese and fried food together. Personally, only because I really like cheese, and decreasing butter. So really it's trying to take some of that saturated fat down. And so this combination of these two diets, which really, like, I mean, there's good research for the med diet too, with respect to cognitive health, but the mind diet really does seem to sort of dominate. And part of that's, I think, because of the polyphenols that we're getting from the berries. The berries literally have this additional benefit that's why the mind diet has gone out of its way to say, look, you're going to eat fruit, but your favorite fruit suddenly is blueberries, because the impact on cognitive function specifically is so good. So there is research looking at this particular diet in a younger female population, actually. So even though if you type in the mind diet online, you're going to get, thousands of articles that have looked at cognitive impairment and cognitive decline with respect to aging in older adults, we do see improvement in women that are in younger years as well, which means we can actually change your current cognitive health as well as your future cognitive health by shifting towards a diet that is more focused on brain health, which is pretty cool, right? So I know I said that, the impact of nutrition on cognitive health is long and delayed. But the uniqueness of the mind diet is that we actually are seeing that by implementing it, we can lower our cognitive age essentially, or decrease the changes that we're experiencing over time. So there was one particular study that sort of followed people, and this was men and women, and they actually found that over the 5 years of the study, that the people who ate the highest amount of the mind diet score, so like they were getting an A+ on their mind diet, and the people who were getting a C, the cognitive difference between those two groups was about 7.5 years at the end of 5 years. So I'm going to say it again. Study ran for 5 years. There were some people that they watched that were killing it with their mind diet, and some people who were not. At the end of the study, based on cognitive tests, the age difference, the cognitive age difference between those two groups was 7.5 years. And so you can see that, like, the protective effect of what was happening in that mind diet group is that if they adhered to the diet, their cognitive age over a 5-year span changed way less significantly than the group who was scoring kind of poorly. That same study group, and the author's name is Morris, was done in 2016. This same group, they also analyzed the people who improved their diet over the 5 years, right? So if at baseline they were getting a C, and then over the 5 years they actually improved their diet and became better at the mind diet adherence, they actually improved parts of their cognitive function and didn't decline as much as the group that had just kind of stayed in the C+ or C group. And then they also found that the patients who had cognitive impairment at day one also had a slower change over the study period. And that was a 9.5-year difference in cognitive aging at the end of the study. So again, on day one, the people who had mild cognitive impairment already. So the other people they weren't flagged. The other group I was just talking about that their cognitive health changed by 7 years. They didn't have cognitive impairment when the study started, right? But the people who were not adhering to the mind diet, their cognitive function was significantly impacted over 5 years. The people who were already flagged, it was almost a 10-year difference in cognitive aging by the end of the 5 years if they were not adhering to the mind diet, which is like insane, right? That we can have that big of a difference. And like, listen to what the recommendations were. I was going to say they're not heroic, and then I remembered how expensive berries are right now. But really, we're not talking about massive life overhaul for the most part. We're talking about some specificity around the nutritional choices that you're making. And they actually were significantly able to change their cognitive decline over a period of 5 years, which is really fascinating. The other piece that I wanted to share about this mind diet before we kind of wrap up for the day was that the mind diet also, it includes foods that maybe this age group of people or like women specifically, are maybe not including on a regular basis for other reasons, like dieting. So there was a kind of a really cool study done in 2022 and these were women that were mean age 48. So these were menopause. This is you, right? This is this group of women that are listening to this podcast. And so half of the women, they said, you guys are just going to lose weight. Here's a handout on how to do it. Good luck. We'll see you in a bit. And then the other group, they said, you guys are going to lose weight too, but you're going to do it with this mind diet. And so they recommended the mind diet, which would have the nuts and the berries and all the things that I just mentioned. So at the end of the study, they all lost weight, right? And that's, if we put people on a specific diet plan, that is what happens. They all lost weight. People that were on the mind diet actually lost more weight, but there must have been something about that. Like they must have eaten less because they felt incredibly satisfied by their mind diet. But the part that I kind of took away from this study that was quite interesting is the women who we just passed them a pamphlet and said, you guys are going to lose weight. They naturally, these women on the weight loss, non-mind diet weight loss group, they naturally cut out nuts. They cut out olive oil. They cut out whole grains. They cut out fish, and they cut down on their poultry. Now, these are specific items on the mind diet, including the poultry, which I didn't mention earlier, but that's on the mind diet as well. They specifically cut down on those foods, right? And if we think about it, it kind of makes sense. Oh, and you know what? Their berry intake also went down. Just looking at my notes here. So we handed the women a pamphlet and we said, you guys are going to lose weight over the next 3 months. Here's your pamphlet. Okay. Good luck. They naturally cut out the foods that are on the mind diet. The other group that we said, you guys are going to lose weight too, but you're going to do it with this nutrition plan, and we put them on the mind diet. They increased their berries, increased their nuts, increased their olive oil, increased their whole grains, increased their fish, and increased their poultry. They all lost weight. Both groups, they all lost weight. But the group that was given the mind diet as their guide included all the foods that prevent cognitive function decline. The group that wasn't told to do anything, they just were told to diet, right? Here's your calorie number. They naturally excluded the foods that improve cognitive function. So think about what happens when women in the wild say, I'm going to go on a diet. Or if women join a program that's not health focused, we'll say, or not long-term health focused. What happens naturally? Naturally, we cut out all the foods. Why? Because they're a bit higher calorie, truthfully. Not the berries. I don't know why the berries go down. But think about the things that people do when they diet. They cut out grains. They cut out fats. Whole grains, fish, nuts, olive oil, all axed out of the diet naturally when people start to lose weight. And yet, the previous study, that Morris study I shared, over a 5-year window of time, if people are not adhering to that mind diet, they're having a rapid decline in cognitive function and will differ by their peers by up to 7 years by the end of the 5 years. So if over your menopause transition, you are also struggling with weight management and you spend a significant amount of time trying to get yourself into a calorie deficit on your own without thinking about your overall global health, what are you doing? Right? You're cutting out the foods, the very foods that we actually need to protect your cognitive health over this same window of life. It's crazy, isn't it? So, what are you going to take away from today's episode? One, I wanted to introduce you to the idea that there are cognitive changes that happen with menopause, and you're kind of like, duh, Jordan, like I actually forgot. I forgot, I know you know that, but I wanted to acknowledge it. I think because we've never done a podcast on cognitive health specifically yet. And this is probably not the last time that we're going to talk about this. There's certainly a lot of research being done in this area right now, and trying to understand the hormone replacement therapy part of things, et cetera, et cetera. This won't be the last time we touch on this. I also wanted to introduce you to the idea that this is a window of time that we maybe want to just be mindful of your cognitive health, no pun intended. And that if you are well past menopause and are having cognitive changes, if you are in menopause and having cognitive changes, we want to just assess you to make sure that it's truly related to your hormones and not something else. Women are at an increased risk of cognitive change. Like, hands down, this is a significant risk factor for us in our lifetime. And I want you to have a preventative mindset. Again, no pun intended. The mind jokes are just like, they're endless. I want you to have a positive and proactive mindset when talking about and thinking about your cognitive health. And I want it to happen earlier in your life than when we're realizing that things are changing. I also wanted to introduce you to the idea of the mind diet, because it's really the same diet that we're talking about over and over and over again. The Mediterranean diet principles, the mind diet principles, low sodium DASH diet principles. This is the nutritional pattern that's really going to get us somewhere in our health. And I wanted to explain like what the simple changes are and what sort of profound impacts we're seeing in the research right now. Like, it's a massive difference, the people that adhere to that versus don't. I can't even, when I found that information around that projection of cognitive change, people who do or do not eat this diet, I was like, crack the almond butter. Like, let's go. We need to eat more nuts, Jordan. And so I wanted you to have that that information at your fingertips. But I also wanted to, pull back the covers on the concepts around calorie restriction and dieting in this phase of life, and how, depending on how you approach your nutrition, I think sometimes we always think about, what is the harm of dieting? Is it, that we're tired or we're angry or that it's not sustainable? But it's pretty rare that we ever point out like, hey, the foods you're cutting out of your diet legit are ruining your cognitive health over time, right? Like, that's probably the first time you've heard that. And so I wanted to share that aspect or that perspective with you, because the impact that it's kind of like anti-nutrition, right? So the impact of like low calorie dieting that excludes the foods that are known to protect your brain, we're maybe doing more harm than good, trying to lose those last 5 pounds. And so I wanted you to have some good food for thought on that one as well. I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you're a practitioner that's listening, we did do a full weekend workshop for practitioners, and we had practitioners of all kinds join this one. I think everyone is recognizing that they need more training and support to help their people in menopause be able to transition with quality evidence-based information. We actually did a full weekend workshop where there was a big conversation about the mind diet and a big conversation about how to support cognitive health in menopause. We also touched on cardiovascular health and mood and bone health. And so we took on sort of those less sexy conversations in menopause support, because they're really the parts of health that will impact longevity in our patient population. And that course actually can be purchased as an on-demand course for practitioners. It's geared towards naturopathic doctors, nurse practitioners. We do talk about medication options, but as a non-prescriber, so how to help your patients advocate for the kind of support and medications that they might need, but also how to educate your patients about medication, because quite often as an integrative practitioner, you have that additional time with patients. And so it's not uncommon for people to bring me their medication suggestions for their mood or for their bone health and say, well, what do you think, Jordan? And so I wanted clinicians to be better equipped to have those conversations so that they can help their patients better understand their treatment plan, even if it doesn't come from you. But that course actually can be purchased as an on-demand course for practitioners, and so that you can feel more confident having these conversations with your patients as well. You can head over to the Confident Clinician main website, which is confidentclinicianclub.com. where you can see all the courses that we have available actually, but specifically the menopause advanced training with the focus on cognitive, bone, cardiovascular health is the one that this information is pulled from. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and there's more to come next week, and so I will see you then. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. We're changing things in women's health. one episode, one topic, one conversation at a time. I want you to feel confident in your health. Please remember that the podcast does not constitute a medical relationship or medical advice. Please talk to your family doctor, your practitioner, your specialist, or anyone on your health team if you think some of the topics we discussed in today's episode apply to you. Take care of yourself. Until next time.